All right. We're back. You know, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has almost become the implementation arm of this administration for extra-constitutional activities related to the implementation of the Agenda 21 system, an agenda which, quite frankly, our Congress has rejected repeatedly over and over and over. And yet this president, in the true dictatorial fashion that it operates, and his entire administration operates, is utilizing the EPA and executive orders to do an end run around Congress. And frankly, I mean, I understand the issue that we cannot impeach this guy because, one, the House doesn't even want to start impeachment processes because, in the end, 2/3 of Congress has to vote for impeachment. And we're never going to get that. This nation is so divided along ideological lines, and the two camps are so divided in terms of whether or not they support this president or don't, that we're never going to get Congress, in the Senate at least, to vote 2/3 majority to impeach this president. I understand why they won't. I also got to tell you that I think it's, you know, with the 2014 elections, there's two things that can happen. One, if the conservatives don't take the Senate back, and they retain the House, of course, and I fully expect they'll retain the House. If they retain the House but cannot win the Senate, there may be enough, although it's got to be done just before the election, but there may be enough motivation to get, you know, a 2/3 majority, but I doubt it. Right now, the Dems are running from this president like he's got leprosy. The other side of this is the constitutional conservatives who should be running. And by the way, I don't know who's running in your given district, but I'm going to tell you this. If they're an establishment Republican, do anything and everything you can to install a primary candidate who will be a constitutional conservative, a patriot, not an establishment Republican. I'm sick and tired of hearing, well, I'm voting the way my party tells me, because your party is not representing us. I don't want a party guy. I want a warrior. I want somebody who's going to go in there and pick a fight. I want more Ted Cruzes. That's what we need, ladies and gentlemen. We need 20 or 30 new Ted Cruzes in the Senate. And we need 50 or 100 in the House. People who are going to say, I don't care what the party says. I don't care if you don't like me. I don't care if you throw me under the bus. I don't care if you don't want to support me. I'm going to do what's right by the constituency that elected me. I'm going to do what's constitutionally required of me. Now, the EPA is out here running amok, slapping us down with 6,000 new proposed regulations. And they've tapped this Francesca Griffo, who's a top staffer at the Union of Concerned Scientists, as their next scientific integrity official. That's a not-for-profit advocacy group that presses for, you know, the green agenda, right? Here's the problem. They're telling us that these 6,000 new regulations are based on science. They're based on, you know, scientific data that they have. I don't know where they got it from. They won't tell us. That's the point. They won't release the scientific data, and therefore there can't be any footnotes to it. There can't be any peer review of any of the scientific data. And science isn't science without peer review. How many times have we seen a guy who said, I did this test, and here's the results of my test, and it's a brand new, newfound thing that will help and change the world of medicine or the world of whatever. And then it gets peer-reviewed by a few other scientists who try to bring the same result about utilizing the same exact tests, and it fails. Because peer review shows that it's not your theory, it's actual fact. Now, the administrator, Gina McCarthy for the EPA, listen to her statement. And this is a joke, because this has got to be one of the most partisan organizations in the government. And they are acting like the enforcer for the Obama administration, especially related to Agenda 21 implementation right here in the United States. Science is and continues to be, she says, the backbone of this agency, and the integrity of our science is central to the identity and credibility of our work. Dr. Griffo brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to EPA that will help continue our work to implement the agency's scientific integrity policy. Well, here's the problem. Ms. Griffo is from a not-for-profit advocacy group that promotes the green agenda. So where do you think her bias is going to come down on the side of this alleged science? The problem is that the EPA won't release the science they're basing all and using to justify all of these controversial regulations, including the ones that are necessarily making your electricity rate skyrocket. Yeah, the coal one. I mean, here's an example. David Vitter, he's a Republican out of Louisiana. He's part of this group of senators, Republican senators, who have actually, and listen to the way they phrase this, because this ought to tell you everything you need to know. As part of a deal brokered with Senate Republicans, the EPA has agreed to release more data and improve its overall transparency. Let's just analyze that sentence for a moment. And this is out of the Free Beacon, which is a pretty, alternative media conservative rag. As part of a deal brokered with Senate Republicans, the EPA has agreed to release. Stop right there. The Senate is in charge of protecting Americans from extra-constitutional overreach. When they're not doing it themselves, of course. Why are we brokering a deal with the EPA? Why aren't we saying under subpoena, you're going to produce this documentation and the scientific information and the data that you are utilizing to institute these onerous regulations and justify their existence? And we're not asking you for it. We're telling you, if you don't give it to us, we're going to shut you down. In the next sentence, they say, Vitter, David Vitter, the ranking Republican on the Committee for the Environment and Public Works, and other GOP members say that the EPA has not yet fulfilled their promise. In other words, they brokered a deal that said, listen, if you want us to continue to support this thing, you've got to you've got to release more data and improve your overall transparency. EPA says sure, and then doesn't produce. Here's the problem. And I want you to think of it in this context. If you went and you said to your teenager, listen, you have been obfuscating to us about what you do when you take the family car. And since it's our car, and you're our kid, and you're underage, and you live under our roof, and we have to watch out for you, and ultimately, at some point in time, since you're using our car, we're responsible for your actions. We're telling you that in order for you to continue to use the car, we want to know where you're going. We want to know that you're not picking up 9 friends, and you're all out drinking all night. Because we keep smelling beer, and came home the other night, the fender was dinged. We're a little worried. And the teenager says, sure, I'll do that. And then the next time you ask your teenager, okay, so who are you going out with and where are you going? Oh, that's none of your business, Mom and Dad. At that point, would you say, I'm going to keep these keys, and our prearranged deal, this for that, keys for information, is over? You see, the problem here is that Congress does not have the backbone to stand up and say, we're going to end the EPA's reign of terror on America. The House needs to go to the EPA and say, if you continue the reign of terror, we're going to strip your funding. And we're not going to give you enough money to go out there and make papier-mâché dollies, much less terrorize the United States of America. Vitter's office had a spokesman that came out and said, scientific integrity is a moot point when the science remains secret, no matter who's in the role. There's currently no method to independently analyze or verify their science or its integrity. You know what that says to me? Lock it down. Shut it down. And if they want money, and if they want authority, and if they want to pass a rule and a regulation, they've got to produce the science. Not to mention the fact that they also have to produce the constitutionality and a linkage directly to the Constitution that authorizes them to, one, exist, and two, to pass 6,000 hidden regulations that everybody's going to be responsible for, but nobody understands or knows. You know, our founders said to us that when laws become so numerous that it is impossible for the average man to understand that they exist, one, and two, what they all are, and three, how they impact him, that we have reached tyranny, the level of tyranny that would cause them to overthrow the government again. I declare, we've arrived. You see, you're responsible because ignorance of the law is no excuse. And these EPA regulations are, when I tell you that they're draconian, I'm not kidding around. The EPA is proposing to assert jurisdiction over all tributaries that affect navigable waters. So let's analyze that for a moment. They're saying that they and the Army Corps of Engineers together get to redefine the Clean Water Act and expand the jurisdiction to cover natural and artificial tributary streams, lakes, ponds, wetlands that affect the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of larger downstream navigable waters. Let's understand what that means. Basically, if there's water, they have control over it. Whether it's in a stream, whether it's in a creek, whether it's in a pond, whether it is sitting there underground. Imagine the EPA determining what your liability is for water that runs past your house in a ditch as a normal drainage process. The water that's coming off your roof. Where I live, do you know I'm taxed $2.50 a month for rainwater that hits my roof? I'm taxed for it. As if to say, if my house wasn't there, the rainwater wouldn't land on the ground. What kind of an absurdity is that? I know it's only $2.50 a month. That's not the point. The point is, I have no control over the rain, and I have no control over where it lands. Well, now you've created runoff. No, I haven't created runoff. The water was going to run off somewhere anyway. Well, no, according to our scientific data, some of it would have evaporated and some of it would have leached into the soil, and therefore you are now causing runoff because it's running off your roof and on your driveway and then down into the sewer system. And give me a break. If they have the authority to get jurisdiction over all natural, and here we go, artificial tributary streams, lakes, ponds, and wetlands that affect chemical, physical, and biological integrity of larger downstream navigable waters under the proposed rule, we're sunk. Let's understand what this means. So, you have a pond. And there's a creek that runs into that pond. And then there's an overflow drain that goes out of the pond so that when it overflows, it's got a place to go. And that overflow runs into another creek somewhere down the road that's a little bit larger. And that one runs into another one that's a little bit larger, which ultimately runs into someone that is the Mississippi River. Right now, the Clean Water Act states that they only have jurisdiction over navigable water. Navigable water is the Mississippi River. Rivers you can actually take a ship or a boat on. We're not talking about a canoe now. Navigable. This would expand their jurisdiction to cover all water that actually gets to those navigable waters. And on top of that, it includes the Army Corps of Engineers flood plan data. And they don't tell us what. Is that the 100-year floodplain? The 500-year floodplain? Is it a 1,000-year floodplain? And by the way, the Army Corps of Engineers, in my region, because under the Blueways they were trying to absorb 18 million acres, they increased the size of the floodplain under a redefining of it. And that's what encompassed the 18 million acres. And then they came in and said, see, it's all under the floodplain. Well, yeah, but you just made this new floodplain up. Well, it's based on scientific data, of course. Okay, show us the data. Well, you can't really see that. Do you smell it, folks? It stinks like dead, rotten fish. The agencies say that, quote, tributaries, as defined in the proposed regulation, in a watershed, are similarly situated and have a significant nexus alone, or in combination with other tributaries, to the chemical, physical, or biological integrity of traditional navigable waters, interstate waters, or territorial waters. Now, here's what they're trying to do. They're trying to redefine the term nexus. You've heard me say it many, many times before. Redefinition is how these agencies get loopholes big enough to drive Rhode Island through. And here's how they're going to do it. They're saying that now what creates a nexus is any natural or artificial tributary stream, lake, pond, wetland that affects the chemical, physical, or biological integrity of the larger downstream navigable water. So think about it. The entire wetlands basin, which is the White River Basin that they were trying to snitch in the Blueways, 18 million acres, ladies and gentlemen. That 18 million acres is a wetland that drains into the Mississippi. So in theory, by passing this, they will have the Clean Water Act jurisdiction to expand into that entire 18 million acres. Not to mention, this is only the White River. I don't know where you live, but I'm telling you that it will affect you. Because if you want to look at it from the realistic perspective of what the Mississippi's entire basin is, it covers the entire state on both sides, all the way from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to Canada, to the Great Lakes. That would put the EPA in charge of, 40% of America on that river alone. You're starting to smell what's going on here? Then the EPA will be able to come into your backyard and say, hey, you can't wash a car here anymore because that water and the suds and the detergents and the whatever run into the city sewer, which eventually makes the creek, which eventually makes the bigger creek, which eventually gets down to the body of water that's navigable. Agenda 21 simplified, or the implementation thereof. Now, the agencies say that existing science and law first of all, law has to be based on constitutionality or it can't exist, because then it's not a law at all. Jefferson told us that. Madison told us that. Any law which is outside the Constitution is no law at all. It's null and void. Existing science and law also show that a significant nexus exists between adjacent water bodies and downstream navigable waters and interstate waters. As written, the proposed rule will, quote, eliminate the need to make a case-specific significant nexus determination for tributaries or for their adjacent waters, because it has been determined that as a category, these waters have significant nexus to downstream larger navigable waters. Boom, there you go. So the proposed rule, listen to what they say. This is their quote now. Will eliminate the need to make a case-specific significant nexus determination. So in other words, it's not going to be a case-by-case determination. It's going to be a blanket determination that says it's assumed. It's assumed that all water has a significant nexus to downstream larger navigable water. You got to be kidding me. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, their scientific study itself says, quote, intermittent and ephemeral streams, wetlands, and open waters in floodplains are connected to downstream waterways and could be subjected to EPA regulation. Intermittent and ephemeral streams. That means even a dry creek bed. Now, if you live in, Newark, it's probably not an issue. If you live in L.A., it is, because they're going to regulate now all of those drainage courses that empty your city. But when we're talking about out in general America, rural America, non-city America, and I'm talking about suburbs to farms, intermittent and ephemeral streams. Ephemeral, what does that mean? Barely there, wispy, like smoke. Intermittent, dry creek beds. They're only wet in wet weather, right? It's a wet weather creek, they call them. Intermittent and ephemeral streams, wetlands, and open waters in floodplains are connected to downstream waterways. Wetlands and open water in floodplain. Floodplain is the key operative word there, because everything, if you go back far enough, and the EP and the Army Corps of Engineers defines it as such, is in a floodplain. I mean, look, everything is in a floodplain if you go back far enough. And everything can be in a floodplain if you just simply redefine what the floodplain is and use the Army Corps of Engineers to classify it as legitimate science. What a scam. Their proposed rule is, quote, to ensure protection of aquatic resources and make the process of identifying which are federally protected waters or, quote, waters of the United States less complicated and more efficient. Right. This way it's less complicated and it's more efficient. Everything is waters of the United States, which all falls up inconveniently into their pocket of jurisdiction. Don't you smell the rat here? What you don't realize is that who gets jurisdiction matters big time. And it matters because once the EPA has jurisdiction over all of this water, they are in charge of everything. And everything requires a permit. You can forget ever building on land again. That if rainwater lands on it, you're sunk. You can never fill in a wetland. You can never fill in a stream, even if it's a dry creek bed. You see, the problem here is that we have an ever-expanding definition of nexus. And they define nexus as neighboring waters, floodplains, riparian areas, and wetlands. It includes tributaries that run through wetlands and bridges, culverts, and dams. It includes lakes, streams, impounds, that's a pond, canals, and ditches. Adjacent ponds, lakes, and similar water bodies are all part of this. Adjacent wetlands would now be considered part of their jurisdiction. You see, even if you border or just contiguous to an area that's covered, then they get to cover you too. They get to annex you in. So if you don't live within the floodplain, but you're adjacent and bordering it, suddenly you're annexed in under their control as well. I mean, for criminy's sake, folks, the only thing left outside of the jurisdiction are going to be the top 5,000 feet of every mountain peak in the country. And if they want to take the map of floodplain back far enough to the days of Noah, they'll even incorporate the Pikes Peak. You see, they can tie a chemical, biological, or physical connection to a jurisdictional water supply or navigable water through the most ephemeral, the most insignificant methodologies. And when you incorporate the entire floodplain, you've just given the EPA control over what? About 70% of America. Imagine that. And, worse yet, to make it even worse, they don't have to go out on a case-by-case basis and identify these because it's just assumed automatically. And it's to protect aquatic resources. So basically, they're going to say, well, we found a snail there. There's some kind of a plant that grows in that water, and so therefore we're offering protection to the plant and we're barring you from any use of your property. And they're defining significant nexus to be basically anything. This is the same agency, by the way, that was just caught with their director using Gmail to hide email so that it wasn't trackable for government purposes. Aha! For accountability. Yeah. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Obamacare secret bailout of insurance companies. You know, you don't hear about this kind of stuff in the NBC, ABC, CBS, MSLSD, and Communist News Network, and many times even on Fox News. You know why? Because the alternative media is the only source of information out there that is really breaking these kinds of stories. The only time the mainstream media will cover it is when it gets to be so big, so obvious, that no one can ignore it any longer. And they can't pretend it's not a story. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll talk about this Obamacare secret bailout of insurers. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm the host here. And you can find us by going to the web at americasvoicenow.org. You can watch our YouTube videos there after, they're usually up there about noontime or so. You can also find us on Facebook by going to facebook.com/America's Voice Now. You can find links to the shows and the podcast streaming and so forth there as well. If you're a Facebook user, please hit the like button. If you're not a Facebook user, you can still visit the page and see the benefit of it. It's a public page. You don't have to be a Facebook user to see any of it. And then the rest of the time, you can go to youtube.com/America's Voice Now, and you can please share these videos with your friends. If there's something about one of these videos that is applicable to you or your friend, share it. All right, we're going to be right back.